Welcome to A Fork in Time, the alternate history podcast.
Welcome back to A Fork in Time, the alternate history podcast. Don sitting in the we just didn't bring the station wagon or the minivan version. We brought the whole Winnebago today because we're doing this episode as part of the live stream as we're hopping into the A Fork in Time way back. Let's Change History machine. I am joined by Alexis, co-founder of the podcast. I'm joined by Chris Capola. I'm joined by both of our Erics. That would be Rush and Darling Bond. I'm joined by Robert Koshy, and I'm joined by Dylan Holzheimer. And by the way, we're joined by lots of other folks that are also participating because they're in our live stream. So if you haven't participated in the live stream, you can go and find the live stream, by the way, on YouTube. But the only thing you're going to get here in the podcast channel is this episode. So if you want to hear what happened before this, and there's some interesting things that happened before this. For example, we just discovered there's a massive effort by Big Slaw to have their influence on U.S. government that I think needs to be investigated. Somebody may need to be impeached before it's all said and done over that. Then if you don't go back and catch the live stream, you will have no idea what we just made reference to. But those that do. All right. So today we said that the live stream episode would be based upon one of the topics that was suggested by the folks in our Discord channel and that we actually voted on. So we had a vote, and the plebiscite, no sheep votes were cast as far as we know in the process here, although we can't swear to that. But as a result of that, the plebiscite means that we're landing back on a topic that I took on, I think, in episode 28 by myself. But now I have compatriots to go with me. And that's this concept of what if Germany had succeeded in a plot that did happen in the real timeline, which was designed to damage, blow up, or otherwise destroy Hoover Dam. So that's what we're going to talk about today, is an alternate timeline where Hoover Dam is destroyed by German action, and we've chosen to set that based upon sort of looking at the timing of what happened in the real world and other things that were going on. We're going to make that April of 1940 is what we're going to have as our point of departure or our fork here. So that's what we'll be going off from there. So as we always do on the podcast, I'm going to let real quick, just for the benefits of our listeners only, not our live stream folks. This has already happened. I'm going to go around really quick. Let everybody say hi so you can recognize their voices. Starting with you, Chris. You want to say hi to good people?
Hi, good people.
There you go. Eric Rush.
Glad to be here.
Alexis.
Hello, everybody. Long time no talk.
Yeah, good to have you. Eric DB.
Oh, God, I totally choked, but hi. Hello.
Robert.
Hello.
And the toasty Dylan. If you're not on the live stream, you have no idea what we're talking about.
Hello, everyone. This might be the last you hear of me for this podcast, but since we're in the Winnebago, I would like to go ahead and claim the casting as Lone Star in our office production of Spaceballs.
Fair enough.
You're not going to be certain presidential candidates' dogs strapped to the roof.
No, I'll be Pizza the Hut. How about that?
Okay. Pizza the Hut. Okay.
All right. So the historical what did, we often cover the historical what did here. The historical what did was there was a plot by German agents. Information about this plot came out in the late fall, moving into the winter of 1939. Interception of some communiques that went through Mexico City, of all places, went through Mexico. We talked about that off podcast about this interesting connection between German stuff happening in the United States that comes through Mexico. Echoes of past events like the Zimmerman telegram being a good example of that. But that particular plot was thwarted, and so nothing happened to Hoover Dam. So in the real timeline, what's interesting to me is I remember this one back doing the episode that I did. There really was, there was some enhanced security just because there was always concern about, keeping things secure. But it's not like, to the best of my knowledge, that this made much public knowledge based upon what I remember about the real timeline. And it wasn't like it changed a lot of what went on in terms of what happened. I want to circle back around to that at a later point, because I think that's one of the interesting things about the what if is the difference between the primary opponents of the United States in World War II, Germany and Japan, and how things were thought about by the populations. I think that's an interesting concept here for all kinds of reasons. But in our alternate timeline here, where we're going to pick up as our point of departure is that sometime, let's call it April 1st, because it actually echoes a real interesting thing that Eric DB discovered as we were doing some quick research before we started recording here today, that my understanding is the intent was to put a bomb in through the intakes. For those of you that have been to the Hoover Dam, you know that there are the 4 intake areas that come out of Lake Mead that then funnel down through the dam, help produce the power that what's there. But also, you have a very tall dam that's covering a very narrow, that the very nature of the design of the dam is this very narrow restriction through a canyon there that, you know, has been blasted out and other things have been happened to. So the water level behind, the water level beyond the dam, substantially different in terms of what's happening there. That's what enables the power to be generated. And so if you blow up the innards there and then you blow up the face of the dam, which if I recall correctly is actually being held in place sort of by the pressure of the water from Lake Mead. That was part of the engineering of what was going on here. So we lose the dam, and I'm going to toss it over to the rest of the crew here quickly. The main inputs of that, obviously there's downstream devastation from the flooding and what goes down from that point on. So you're going to have loss of life. To what degree, I don't know downstream, but you're definitely going to have loss of life downstream. You're going to lose the power generation capabilities from Hoover Dam, which are pretty substantial and are being relied upon heavily by California populace. What else happens as a result of that?
Well, I think it's going to be pretty quick before we discover who is responsible for this. So we've lost, people have died. You know, I think we could argue probably more people have died in the destruction of Hoover Dam and all the flooding that results from that than who died in Pearl Harbor. And that was an impetus of war for us in our timeline. So I think it's very easy for us to use this as a reason for war in this timeline. And the agents who were caught in our timeline, and this was in November of 1939, were not maybe the most professional when they were caught by our embassy in Mexico City. And so it's very easy for me to imagine that similarly, even if they were successful, they would not be able to hide that very easily or for very long. So I think we would very quickly know that these were German agents. And then I think the December 7th, 1941 speech, the day which will live in infamy, is going to be moved up a bit and will be a very different day that lives in infamy.
Well, I'm going to throw something out just because. So if they're caught in Mexico again, and let's kind of leave that in there, that we see this goes through Mexico. Do we ignore Japan completely, which I think we would at this point? Germany's at war, but by the way, there's a small portion of the U.S. Army is just going to roll Mexico at this point, and we're going to take it over because this is 2 times now in 2 instances where Mexico has allowed, we use the word that, a foreign power to assert themselves. And so we are going to, air quotes for the podcast listeners, we are going to assist Mexico with maintaining their internal security, because I could actually see that rolling in. That is one thing I could actually see happening, because I could see the argument being made, hey, you've done this twice now that you've conspired, so there's obviously something going on.
So that actually adds to another interesting kind of tie-in here, which is at this point, as I remember, the president of Mexico is Lázaro Cárdenas, who's the only head of state outside the Soviet Union ever awarded the Stalin Prize for Socialist Labor.
Yep.
At this point, Mexico actually supplied arms to the Republicans in the Spanish Civil War, provided refuge to a lot of them, was not quite like a cube, like the way we view Cuba, but was very left of center. Oh, and by the way, at this point, the Soviet Union is also, hey, let's understand the Soviet Union at this point is aligned with Germany.
They're together.
So there's, normally to a modern listener, that setup just made no sense because wait. We're attacking a Soviet client or, maybe not client state, but Soviet friendly state because of what the Germans did. But there is a very clear line to be drawn right there.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'll be honest, I had forgotten the flip. I forgot that the Soviets had flipped because I just always associate, like I have that picture in my head of Stalin, Churchill, Reagan. Is it Reagan?
No.
Yeah.
No.
FDR.
Roosevelt. Thank you.
Roosevelt.
It was an R.
Mhm.
I have that picture in my head. So I had forgotten that they had started the war on the other side. So yeah, you're completely right, Chris.
And the other thing that I think we mentioned there, Pearl Harbor, whoever mentioned, advancing that speech up a little bit with a different target, is that I've seen this so many times. A lot of Americans, when they heard on December 7th that Pearl Harbor had been attacked, it's like, where is Pearl Harbor? Because it was, it's in a beautiful place. People that were familiar with Hawaii knew maybe what it was. But and by the way, Hoover Dam was attacked. There was not anybody in the United States who didn't know what Hoover Dam was. I mean, it was it was recent construction. It was a big thing. It had been a big part of what had gone on during Depression era in terms of, for lots of reasons, it was providing the power and electricity. Somebody had asked in the live stream chat, with Los Angeles, the nature of the river is the river flows directly south. It's basically along the California-Arizona border is where the Colorado goes. So there's no flooding in Los Angeles.
No.
But it was a major boon to power generation. Reason Las Vegas is part of what it is in terms of the readily accessible power there, the other things that are there. It's still a major contributor to power generation in that area. Again, that's a long way from me saying Pearl Harbor what? Hoover Dam, everybody knew what Hoover Dam was. I think the psychological impact of that, plus it actually being in the continental U.S. versus being out on an island in the middle Pacific, I think it's easy to underestimate just what a difference of magnitude that is, even though it's the same type of event, a surprise attack on American soil.
The other thing to consider is that Japan has not signed its non-aggression pact with Hitler's Germany. We are about an entire year away from that happening in 1941, preceding the attack on Pearl Harbor. Likewise, Japan was on the outs with Germany because of their non-aggression pact with the Russians, because for as much as we build up that Japan and the US were competing in the Pacific, which we were, to the Japanese, they were much more scared of the Soviets because they were afraid that if the Soviets landed in Japan, they would murder the emperor.
So do we make a deal with Japan? Do we say,
we might make a deal with Japan because this is even before the July, in July of 1940, Roosevelt had called off any exports of steel, scrap metal, oil, all the things that the Japanese needed us to supply.
And this is the other interesting thing.
Oil was the deal.
That was late. I think that the oil was 41, August of 41.
Right.
But what we're looking at here is if this happens April of 1940, maybe this solidifies a Eurasian, a Nazi Soviet pact with the United States getting involved. And now we're actually sending the Japanese all the arms we possibly can, almost like a Lend-Lease situation to Great Britain, as long with the understanding that they're going to use them in Siberia.
And we'll forget the Panay thing because this.
I mean, by the way, Panay was like 38.
Yeah,
38.
And it was a gunboat in the middle of the river, and
it was already forgotten.
Yeah. This, however, as Don said, I think the impetus here that really drives it home is the significance of Hoover Dam at that point, because like you said, Don, it had been completed literally 5-6
It's
years
the
before.
shiny new toy.
Yeah.
36.
Yeah,
Of
it was.
American infrastructure.
It was essentially brand new.
It was the only thing Herbert Hoover had on his name that wasn't actively terrible.
Yeah.
They make a good vacuum. They make a good vacuum.
Yeah.
Did he design that? I don't think so.
I'm not sure. He was a trained engineer.
He was an engineer, and nobody's doubting that he was a pretty smart guy. But
So where we are right now, just to kind of catch up. So the dam is blown up. We've arrested the guys. We trace it to Mexico. The day that will live in infamy speech is now in April of 1940, and it's aimed at Germany and Mexico. We've aligned ourselves with Japan, and we're giving them whatever they can under the auspices that they're going to fight Russia for us.
Yeah. Other
At
than
the
that,
same
it's
time.
exactly like the timeline that you know. Other than that,
Exactly.
it's exactly like the
It's
timeline that
totally
you know.
different at that point.
Well, and
But-
then the other interesting thing that goes with that, Robert, is the fact that we were in the prep, and then as our listeners were helping us out with, the invasion of France is not until the following month,
Right.
and so the term that Chris used it. This is the phony war, right? It hasn't really. There is conflict in Europe, but it hasn't kicked off in the way that it's about to kick off in Europe. And so, my argument here, and this is why I mentioned the distinction here, what happens as a result of Pearl Harbor in the real timeline is that Japanese Americans are interred. Even once the war is full on because of what happens in December of 41 and the declaration by Germany of war on the United States and the counter declaration back, nobody, and this is mentioned even multiple times in the person that recommended the topic here, is that there's a large German population in the United States, the German Bund. In Texas, we have a very, very large German contingent. In Central Texas, so much so that it's there. And yet we never see German Americans interred the exact same way that I'm aware of.
German nationals, if you had not gotten American citizenship, as I actually had family that were stopped and questioned because they were not American citizens yet, but German nationals and Italian nationals were detained, but those were non-citizens. Those were citizens of those foreign nations. Japanese Americans, people born here or people naturalized were interned. That's the difference. But there were German nationals detained and interned.
And my argument for the difference there is that because of, I think that was colored by a lot of things, by the way. I think there's an element of racism there. There's an element of jingoism that you can't avoid. But the other reason being that the sneaky attack on us at Pearl Harbor fed into that, what was already there. So now if you have this the sneaky attack on Hoover Dam playing in the other direction, you can talk about the global stage. We've talked about it here, but even just how that plays out inside the country, I think might be a little bit different, right?
Well, by the way, here's something that's going through my mind right now. There's another fairly significant minority group we just threw on the other side in the United States, especially in the Southwest.
Yeah, that's true. And that's, well, and the thing is, we think about culture. I mean, here in the Midwest, I would argue we are predominantly not a British diaspora culture. We're primarily a German diaspora culture here in the Midwest. And, and most of us are both, but it's, how do you even do that? Like, how do you, for people who are citizens, how do you even do that? And I'm not excusing anything that was done for, against Japanese Americans. It was horrible, but I mean, it would be difficult to even, try something like that. But I think, unfortunately for Mexican Americans,
exactly,
I think that would be very likely that there would be something, there would be some pretty awful stuff that would be.
There is some very ugly history of the Texas Rangers in South Texas anyway. that will, under this scenario, is very much escalated. I'm not sure all German national. Well, I think the German nationals, not U.S. citizens. But if you were a member of the Bund Party, hello, this is your new home. It has nice barbed wire decorations. I think all Bund members are toast at that point, because that was I'm going to use the word, that was a open records act. The FBI, this is the other Hoover name, Hoover FBI. They come in and they run roughshod over the Bund records. And if you were a Bund member, you are now interred. And I'm in my head, I'm wondering how Mr. Ford and Mr. Lindbergh come out in this world.
Interesting, because German Americans knew about the Bund. And what you were actually supporting. And so I think back to my great grandfather was immigrated from Germany and settled in Kansas as a farmer, and was very much against Hitler, was very much against the Bund, saw them as impediments to German Americans being full part of society. So people weren't blind to this.
Well, it's also so many of the German Americans in Kansas, in Wisconsin, in Minnesota were the generation of 48. They were liberal nationalist Germans that were basically kicked out by Prussian militarism.
Yep.
So
that's exactly
all of that.
Yeah. And who wanted to, all I really want to do is farm in a democratic republic. And so that, that'll get you to Wisconsin, that'll get you to Kansas.
Yeah. So do you think we see an internment of Mexican Americans, or do you think it is more of a mass deportation
unfortunately,
like Eisenhower in the 50s?
Yes. Unfortunately, I think you probably do.
Yeah. So that was not the first place, and I think all of this is viable and realistic. That was not the first place my mind went. Not making the connection, but the Mexico connection immediately. I was thinking, what is the impact in the bigger picture that we've already talked about here? But it's real. It's real today. It was real then. It's what's there, and it's, what's scary about it is, again, this whole idea of, it was one thing when there was a surprise attack by the military on Pearl Harbor,
on a military installation.
Right. One military attacking another, right?
Right.
Versus, this has the elements of terrorism or that type of thing. That's a very different place to be in. So then, the reason I had the question about what is a question of trust, what else, what's the next target? What happens next? How do we protect ourselves? And remembering that all of World War II, for all intents and purposes, was never fought on American soil in any way, shape, form, or fashion of substance. And suddenly this type of conflict, or the fear of this type of conflict, is in your backyard. It's on American soil. That's a psychologically different thing that's going on.
The other thing I just want to throw out there is this: what's going on in Europe right now? You have people shouting for the RAF to bomb the Ruhr dams, to bomb German industry. And the British government specifically makes the decision not to, because those industries are private property and are not considered valid targets.
I think it opens the targets up, but I think, and I think now we've got to start going into more of the other repercussions of the dam being blown up. What was the dam built for? Yeah, flood control, whatever. That was not what the dam was built for.
Electricity.
The dam was built for electricity. So now Los Angeles is power poor. And what's happening out in Los Angeles as we get geared up and get ready for things?
Consolidated Voltee, Grumman, a lot of your, if you picture the United States, picture any plane that flew off a carrier in World War II, it was probably made in Los Angeles. Plus some. Now you've got your impact. Now you've got your impact on our war effort. So to play this out, this is a month, 2 months maximum before the fall of France. None of this changes that.
No, not at all.
No.
No, right?
France falls.
Even with that, I don't think. Yes, it affects American aircraft production. I still think Battle of Britain happens the way it did because shipping time, stuff was in the works, and just by the nature of what tended to be the kind of planes that were built in Southern California, these aren't quite the fighters that Great Britain produces its own.
Right, Spitfire.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. Nothing changes there.
Okay.
Now, I have a question. So, assuming in our timeline we have declared war on Germany,
mm-hmm.
we have occupied Mexico. Because we have to assist Mexico in maintaining their internal security. Does Hitler invade Russia still?
So this is the other.
Does Barbarossa happen?
This is the other question I'm talking through, which is, the Mexican government at that time was very friendly to the Soviet Union, as has been noted in some of the chats, openly anti-fascist. They were the only government that actually, other than the Soviet Union, that straight on openly supported the Republicans in Spain, and they gave more of them refuge than the Soviet Union did. Part of the game that the British are playing in Scandinavia is supporting the Finns to theoretically fight the Russians, because the Soviets had attacked Poland. They were also talking about bombing Baku from bases in the Middle East. Does this escalation with conflict, the United States occupying a Soviet-friendly state, and the United States, let's be honest, when the United States is attacked on its home soil, it kind of has a flailing effect. It kind of declares war on everybody, regardless of who actually did that. So does that solidify the August 39 pact with the United States going after the Soviet Union as well? And because they do that, the Soviet Union officially becoming involved in the full European war against Britain, whatever remains of France, etc.
So have we replaced Japan and the Soviet Union in respective sides?
There's a chance.
I think so. Yeah.
Well, Japan was on the Allied side in World War I, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah.
And they had been engaged in border clashes in Manchuria and in Mongolia with the Soviet Union. And this is a place, if you look at North Africa, when France falls, one of the reasons the British fought in North Africa is because that's one of the only places that British territory actually touched a access line territory. Now you've got Manchuria / Siberia, where you could have and I don't think anybody would sit here and say that with what's on the line, I don't think anybody would have had a second thought about abandoning China to whatever fate happened.
Yeah. China is now on its own, 100%.
And the Japanese
the flying tigers don't even exist in this timeline.
Right. Do they have anything to fly?
No. I mean, that's the first problem is you don't have any P-40s. That's for sure.
But I think also,
sure.
one of the reasons the Japanese decided to go the way they did is because so much of their army was tied down in China.
Yep.
I think if we being the West, the United States, Great Britain, who, as we talked about, were their allies in World War I, Great Britain had largely supported Japanese development, in the Russo-Japanese War, and had helped train the Navy and all of these things. Maybe they intervene politically just to shut down the Sino-Japanese War, because we need those Japanese soldiers in Siberia.
This has a lot more ripples than I initially thought that it did. That's the fairest way I'm going to describe it. I thought this is
Don,
like the world is bigger
Don,
than
we
we
have
thought
made
it was.
we have caused World War III because of sheep.
I understand that. And recently, what did somebody say on the last episode? That escalated quick, kind
That
of thing.
escalated quickly.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the nature of democracy, Don. You open up a vote, you let the people have their say, and look what happens. Now we're at war with Russia.
Yeah. But the biggest thing that jumped out at me is I think all of we talk all the time, and I mentioned this. We were talking off podcast, and because we have guests that are watching how the sausage gets made to a degree here. Is that we always look for viable forks. That's one of the tests that we try to we've gone down paths that were non-viable forks, but most of the time we look for what's the most viable thing. What actually, not just what if, but what legitimately what if could have happened. In that sense. And I hadn't thought about, again, the whole Mexican element. That was not an element here at all. And I hadn't thought about the particular ripple of flipping the fact that Japan is not the enemy. Japan becomes the ally, and what that means. And of course, the thing that also just popped into my head is, yes, there would be multiple fronts on this war. There would be a Pacific front, but it's a very different Pacific front than the one that we're familiar with.
No, it's not a Pacific front. It's a Siberian front.
Right.
Siberian front. Yeah.
It's an Eastern Asian front, right, at the end of the day. But, then that means that the war in Europe is also very, very, very different. And the timing on American involvement in the war in Europe is very different. I mean, that's always what strikes me. Again, in my head, I always think there's a great book. It's about the baseball season in 41. I hear 41. It's the very end of 41, December 7th. And so for all intents and purposes, World War II with American involvement, actual involvement is a 1942 and onward event in terms of being actively involved other than the arsenal of democracy involvement. Now we're talking about an involvement 2 years earlier with a different cast of characters, with different balances of power, different things that are going on. The World War II that we know and the World War II that comes from this are incredibly different.
And it takes us much longer to ramp up because we didn't start the draft again until summer 1940 is when it got really kicked off. September 1st, no. September 16th, 1940, first peacetime draft. I'm just sitting here thinking through. So
and we actually did an episode on the extension of that.
Yeah, I was just thinking that. Yeah.
And so now we are looking at a super small army that was at one point using cars with cardboard tanks on top of them as their armor. So this could actually, in my mind, it almost makes this. We're going to send Japan a ton of arms and a ton of stuff. You guys go fight Siberia. We'll get you out. Of China. Negotiate. Whatever. We're done. You go do that.
But now my question is, what are the Germans doing after they take over France? Do they put a whole bunch of Panthers on the I just have this image of Germany fighting to the last Soviet, which they would love to be able to do. The United States fighting to the last Japanese soldier. The United States isn't producing enough yet. So it's very possible.
Nor do we have any military. We weren't really ready to roll until mid-1942, and that was with an army that had really been drafted and put in place in 1940.
So we're fighting proxy wars, with the exception of maybe in Mexico.
The home front in Mexico.
Yeah,
we keep people home to guard everything critical
while we're building up. Because let's face it, we talked about this as well. The United States Army cannot actually occupy Mexico.
Well, we can't occupy the whole country.
Right.
Do we try to take El Norte?
Or do we support thinking about Mexican politics,
a client state of some sort? Or
we are not very far from the Cristeros Wars.
Yeah.
This is still, everybody involved in Mexican politics at this point had been a general in the Mexican Revolution Civil War. So the PRI hasn't really solidified, and the regime hasn't solidified. But we you can't. Again, when the United States is attacked on its homeland, it starts declaring war on random countries and gets involved in wars that it can't occupy countries.
Yeah.
So if we play this out, there's probably an hour and a half of discussion we could have about all the ramifications here. So I'm just gonna fast forward ahead a little bit and I'm gonna say the inevitable words we always say. We're probably gonna come back and revisit this because now I'm interested in revisiting this with a slightly different take on things, and I think it's valuable. This may become listener feedback episode number 1 to a degree because we have plenty of it. Not that we've been ignoring, but that I've seen over in the live stream chat.
I've seen questions about the Manhattan Project.
Yeah.
By the way, I do want to kind of pull all this together. Helen, I love where your head is at. This is something else. If it is shown how effective bombing dams is, the TVA and the Columbia River dams, those are 2 critical things that haven't been talked about.
Absolutely.
The United States did not use. Yeah. The United States did not use.
The Manhattan Project had 3 major sites.
Washington,
Washington,
Hanford, Washington, which was the Columbia River dams. Oak Ridge,
Alamogordo,
Tennessee.
Oak Ridge, Tennessee.
and then Oak
No.
Ridge.
Oak Ridge,
Tennessee.
Yeah, Oak
Yep.
Ridge.
which was the TVA dams. Honestly, Alamogordo was a research facility.
Yeah, Alamogordo just came up with the ideas, but all the
You-
production stuff was
You needed those other 2 facilities
and you needed
and
the
the
electricity
power
big
provided
time.
by those dams.
Because when you're enhancing uranium, and that requires
A lot
a
of
lot
power.
of things, but it requires a
Tons
lot
of
of power to do.
electricity.
So we're and are we trying to power this project? We're trying to do any of this so close to the front in Los Alamos, or do we
Well-
bring it into Chicago?
Oh no, it happens. I think it happens in Chicago, where you have,
Yeah.
So
but I think that's another real thing to discuss, which is, hey, once you realize how valuable Americans' dams are there other attacks on them, even not knowing how important they were to this project? But they were very important to this project. And if you are reading, Dams Monthly in 1938, 1939, the Columbia River Dam, the TVA, and the Hoover are what you're talking about.
But by the way, a damn DAM good magazine if it actually existed. But and again, to me, the interesting thing there is just this. I'm still fixated in my own head. You may even see the expression on my face about what's going on with this close by international but yet domestic situation in terms of how much energy is having to be devoted to this concern about security threats, maintaining whatever form of occupation, influence, whatever word you want to use to describe what you feel necessary to do with Mexico. I guess we still trust the Canadians at this point. That's the good news if you're the United States. But it's very hard to be focused on what you're doing by proxy or by your own forces in Europe or in Asia when you're concerned about what's going on in Amarillo, kind of thing. And I think that's the part that, in my thinking about, in my understanding of World War II, yes, there were home security concerns because you're at war, right? But not every day waking up is my dam safe, is my this safe, is my that safe. I mean, Americans felt pretty secure during World War II with their homeland security, which allowed them then to devote resources and attention to the international aspects of the war. This is a different war. It doesn't have that feel. Why? Because the attack was on American soil, not just an American port, not just an American military base way out in the middle of the Pacific, but it's front and center, right?
On an American civilian target.
Right.
Remember, even the British who eventually get very quickly to just burn every freaking city we can find, they're still not at the point of being okay bombing civilian factories.
No.
So I have another bad thought here because I'm gonna keep stirring this pot. We're at war with Russia.
Yes.
Russia is communist.
Yes.
What happens to American favorite, most popular last summer scientist, if we try to recruit, do we even try to recruit him? Or does basically everybody get their way and Oppie is out of the picture?
I was going to say, I don't know where Barbie lands in this.
Yeah, where does Barbie go?
Yeah.
Where does the Barbenheimer land at this point?
I can't imagine that we didn't trust him anyway.
Mhm.
I mean,
Yep.
we know we didn't trust him anyway, but I can't imagine that we would tolerate his leftward leanings.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm going to just say this based on enough of my research and stuff. Without Oppenheimer, there is no bomb. You needed his quirky, genius, weird, whatever it was, to get
Well,
the
it's
bomb.
not just Oppenheimer. How
there
many
were others,
of these
yeah.
scientists were either leftist or were European that are, very, I alluded earlier to, actually, my grandfather was detained because he was technically a German citizen fighting in the United States Army when Germany declared war. How many other German citizens? Einstein was a German at one point.
Yep.
Fermi was an Italian citizen at one point. Szilard was a Hungarian citizen. How many of these people are not trusted because they're from a foreign country?
All of them.
But by the way,
Yeah.
Evan has named the episode in the live stream chat. So if you're listening to this on the feed, it's probably no Barbenheimer, and that comes courtesy of giving Evan credit coming from the live stream participants that are there. So I'm just going to close this out here to sort of summarize this, because again, I think we could go on and we will revisit this probably through a listener or something else. What is the end result of this revised war? How does this ultimately end? Is there a negotiated settlement where Germany Germany has to capitulate because they're the loser in the real timeline World War II? Is there a different role for Germany? Where do the Soviets sit in this? It's a different Japan. It's a different United States, I think, because of what we've talked about here. There's a lot of stuff here, but do we end up with how does this war end? And what do we have after this war? Because my first place I go is we have maybe a Cold War, but it's a different kind of Cold War, right?
It's with Japan. So I think we ally with Japan out of convenience, and I think we end up with probably a unified democratic Germany and a fractured Russia, whatever Russia looks like, and
a
Cold War with
unified
Japan.
democratic Germany?
Yeah, because there's no Soviet Union.
There's no partitioning. We don't partition Germany. Germany ends up being Germany looks a lot like Japan in our timeline.
Yeah.
Does Germany lose?
Today.
Does Germany lose? Are we all in agreement that Germany loses here?
No, I'm not.
I'm
willing
not
to say
100%
that.
sure of that.
I think if you marry German engineering with Russian manpower, and who's the manpower on the, let's call them, American Anglo-Japanese side? I mean, we've talked about reusing Japanese soldiers, but they don't have the numbers here.
And there will eventually be American boots on the ground on a lot of them. And so I'm not going to say it's not going to be bloody, Chris, and it's not going to be in 1945.
Mm-hmm. I think what you might have is conceding the Eurasian landmass, and then you get into a Cold War of Germany. You get into the German-Soviet.
Oh, thank you, George Orwell. You've just created 1984.
Yes.
You've created Eurasia, East Asia, and Oceania.
And who are we always at war with? I get confused. I can't remember over.
Nobody
but
can
again,
remember.
but East Asia. I mean, in 1984, East Asia is kind of a Japanese Chinese conglomerate here. I think the Eurasian power base drives Japan out of Asia, and then there's some agreed to peace, and then Hitler gets to go at Stalin the way he always wanted to. And now we have
definitely holds off until
now
the
we
end
have
of
the
this.
United States, Great Britain, Japan sitting by, watching them fight each other, building up our strength, knowing that at some point we're going to want to throw our weight behind one of them, but not knowing which one it is quite yet.
And does
Interesting.
So in
Interesting.
that timeline, does Hitler get nukes? Is going to be another question.
That is a really interesting question.
That's something I think we're going to have to think about.
Well,
we're going to have to
eventually,
circle
yes.
back here, Don. at
Yeah.
some point.
So the question of does Hitler get nukes is always a timing question,
Yes.
because in a long enough timeline, the answer is absolutely yes. So if we're talking 1952, of course he has nukes.
And does von Braun get to have his fun at the same time?
Probably. So if
that's
we're
a dangerous world we're looking at.
Because there was a lot of kind of failed attempts for Germany. But if we're 1948 or so or beyond, and you ask me that question, does Germany get nukes? Absolutely.
Wow.
It's ultimately going to depend on how the leadership of it all breaks down, how quickly everyone is to act. Basically, for the US, we are in the same position as Austria-Hungary at the start of World War I, where we suffer a terrorist attack, and a country who either knew it was about to happen and either just didn't take it seriously or was complicit is basically going to have its sovereignty attacked by us unless they agree to our 12 reasonable demands so we can investigate the matter thoroughly. Meanwhile, the rest of the world is then dealing with the Hitler situation. How is that going to work out between them and the Soviets? I'm very much afraid that the Allies will go with Hitler just to defeat communism. But again, you can read all about that in the Harry Turtledove book, The Great Switch. As for Japan and Asia, it is kind of like Theodore Roosevelt's dream, because when he administered the peace talks, he made the gentleman's agreement of like, hey, all of Asia is going to be Japan's. It's inevitable. Like, they're going to just be one ethno state, which is Pan-Asian, but it's going to be led by the Japanese. The problem with the Japanese is they have a military and a navy who do not work together and are actively competing. So we have allies, but the allies are not great.
Yeah. We are definitely going to revisit this one. And by the way, I have to tell you, in all honesty, when I saw the suggestion of the topics, like, I already did that. We already did that with Hoover Harbor, but that was just me. I didn't have the full creative juices of this team to really blow this up into something more than just blowing up a dam. So thanks to the suggestion on the topic there. We'll circle back around. This has been fun. I know a lot of the members of our cast have to head off to do other things. And so, Eric, good luck tonight with everything you're doing there and the kiddos. And I just want to say once again how much fun this has been for us. I enjoyed the stuff before we recorded and enjoying the stuff here. So we're going to head and close out the actual episode, just reminding our listeners, visit our website. If you weren't part of the live stream, so you're hearing this as part of the podcast release, you can go to our YouTube channel and and check out the live stream there, because it'll be archived there, and you can see the fun that ensued before or after, if you want to call it fun. We had fun, we thought, that's going on there. But this is what we do. You got a glimpse to a little bit behind what goes on with before an episode, during an episode, and all the other fun stuff. And I think you can enjoy why we enjoy each other by seeing what went on here today, so as much as anything. So on behalf of the team, all of us, I just want to say thank you to our listeners. We appreciate you. We're glad we've made it to 200 episodes. We're an outlier among podcasts. I'm amazed at the number of podcasts that don't make it past like their 10th episode. So sometimes it's easy to criticize myself for our inconsistency, sometimes our release schedule, but we are way out there on the right-hand side of what's going on in terms of what's there. And that's not just because of my efforts or Alexis's efforts, but now the team efforts as well. So Alexis, you're with us now, so I'm going to let you close us out. Do we have any suggestions for our Fork in Time listeners if they happen upon a Fork in Time?
Connor thinks you should take it.
Connor thinks you should take it, so you definitely should.
Thanks for listening to A Fork in Time, the alternate history podcast. Learn more and provide feedback by visiting our website at www.aforkintimepodcast.com. Connect to us on Facebook at facebook.com/aforkintime or follow us on Twitter at AFIT Podcast. If you want to support the show financially, visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/aforkintime. We hope you will join us next time.